We'll start yeah. So hey everyone, we shall now be transitioning into the business session. We're extremely glad to have Amy Shah Raman, and who is a Stanford University graduate, and she's currently working in the Strategic Partnerships Department at Google. And we also have Arina Todd, who has received her BSc in Political Science and Business from the University of Berkeley, and her MBA from the University of Michigan in General Management and Marketing. And she's also the founder of Fresh Monster. Please, would you both like to introduce yourself?
Ami, should we do a quick introduction?
Yeah.
I think we lost Ami. No, there she's back. We can't hear you yet, Ami. Hey, maybe while we're waiting for Ami. Oh, I was going to say maybe we can hear who all is on the call so we know who we're talking to.
Sorry, guys. Sorry, my audio was going in and out of my laptop. But hi, I'm Ami, and this is Irena. And Irena, were you saying, just to kick off, I think what would be super helpful is just by, and I don't know the easiest way to do this, maybe in the chat, if people could just write what age they are, because Irena and I were talking earlier, we just want to make sure this session is as helpful to all of you as possible. So that might be the easiest way, if everyone doesn't mind quickly just putting in chat what their age is. Great. This is helpful to us to kind of cater some of the topics. Okay. Awesome. That gives us a sense. While you guys are chatting that in, we can do a quick round of intros, I think, to start. So I'm Ami, as I mentioned before. I currently am part of the partnerships or business development team at Google. Just kind of a quick background, I was born and raised in the US, in Minnesota. And then I went to undergrad at Stanford. I majored in economics there. And then after university, I basically, and I know times have really changed, but at that point, there were kind of, one of three paths that people went down. It was either consulting, or say four paths. It was either consulting, investment banking, you go to school to, learn more, whether it's med school, law school, master's degree, etc. Or there was like other, right? And other was very, at that point, other meant different things. And it was just kind of random job postings that you would find that might be available. And so for me personally, I knew I didn't want to do consulting, wasn't really into the investment banking space. I didn't know what else I would want to learn. So I didn't want to necessarily go and invest more in my education at that point. So I kind of looked into jobs that I felt like were interesting to me and kind of played to my strengths, which was around people and collaboration. So I joined AT&T. I did a program it was called at that time, Leadership Development Program. And it was essentially a rotational program, because what became clear to me is I had no idea what roles were even out there. And so I did this rotational program, which was 3 years, and you were part of this like cohort of people. And AT&T essentially put us into different roles. So I think it was 9 months, they would put us in a different function within the company just to give us exposure in terms of what are different types of roles available. So I did that for about 4 years, and I can talk more about career changes later. Actually, Charlotte or Pari, do you mind, one of you, I think I sent over some slides in terms of, if you don't mind projecting that, if it's not already projected just on the agenda slide so people know what we're going to talk about today. And then after that, I decided to and I think there's an agenda slide just to give everyone an overview of what we're going to talk about today. And then after that, I went to Unilever to do brand management, which is kind of a form of marketing. And once I was at Unilever, I essentially stayed there for 12 years, almost 12 years. And I did a variety of different roles within Unilever, everything from traditional brand management, which is a type of marketing / how do you run a business, everything from that to working with customers. It's called shopper marketing. So it's figuring out how do we market products with a retailer like Walmart, Target, etc. I did that. And then my last 6 years, perfect. Thank you, this slide. And then my last 6 years at Unilever were spent in e-commerce, which at the time, e-commerce, we all know what e-commerce is now, but 10 years ago, e-commerce was kind of a newer thing within a company like Unilever. And just for context, Unilever is a large consumer goods company that makes products like health and beauty and food products, such as Dove shampoo, everything from Dove shampoo to Axe deodorant, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, Lipton tea. So just a different host of different brands. And so I did this e-commerce 10 years ago. I said, what is e-commerce? Like, it was kind of very new within the space, but in my mind, I was like, I want to try something different. So I did the e-commerce route and worked with the different partners, everyone from Instacart back when they were only 30 people and we're a very small startup. And now obviously they're huge, but I worked with them and then managed the Amazon business for Unilever. And then after about 12 years, I wanted another change. And about 2 years ago, I came over to Google, where I'm in a role called business development or strategic partnerships. And essentially my role right now is working within a specific product within Google, which is Google Shopping, working with retailers to help them understand how can they partner with Google to kind of reach consumers in new ways. And so examples are Sephora. Sephora is a beauty retailer. And so I would work with them to understand what are their goals and how can we, Google, help them in terms of all of our shopping solutions, help them reach consumers in new and different ways. So that's just kind of a quick background on myself. Obviously, you'll see here, we'll get into more, dive into different pieces of this, but that's just a brief intro. And next, I'll hand it over to Irena to go through her background.
Sounds good. Ami, we're just doing backgrounds, not diving into transitions yet, right?
Yeah, I think it's just, let's focus on the intros and then we can, yeah, exactly.
All right, I'll do a quick overview of my career. We want to get to the point where you guys ask questions as quickly as possible because we want to be useful. So I'm an immigrant. I came to the US when I was 19 from Croatia. It was sort of the post-war Croatia time. I was an interpreter for UN in Croatia, and through that program, I got a green card to come to the United States. And I came here not knowing that you have to take SATs or anything like that. And so I wanted to apply to colleges, but I couldn't because I didn't have any of the necessary preparation for it. So I went to junior college for a year, and while there, I got ready for college applications, and I went to UC Berkeley, and I double majored in poli-sci and business. Unlike Ami, I kind of always knew I wanted to run a business, so I felt like everything that I was thinking about in college and post-college was designed around how do I learn what's necessary to run a business. And so after college, I worked for Deloitte Consulting in their strategy group, essentially learning about tons of different industries. Every 3 months, you rotate from one client to another, and you learn a ton about what it takes to run a very big company. And then from there, I kept hearing that brand management is the way to really learn to run a business because you're managing a whole P&L, like a product and loss of a product. So I went to business school because that was the way to get into CPG world, at least when I was making these decisions. So I went to business school at Michigan, and from there worked at Unilever, which is how Ami and I got connected. I think we worked on Degree together, right, Ami? If I remember correctly, that was our first brand introduction. And at Unilever, I got the exact experience I was hoping for, where you truly learn what it takes to run a company, at least from a standpoint of here are all the components needed to get a product to market it, to get consumers to buy it. From that standpoint, it felt like an amazing experience. And from there, I felt like I was ready to start my own company, which I did 7 years ago. It's called Fresh Monster, and we do natural personal care products for kids. And last year we added furry kids. So we have a pet line now too. And it's been an incredible experience from the standpoint of how do you build something from the ground up without resources? Because at Unilever, it was a little bit easier because it's a big company with big resources, big teams. I had to do everything from scratch. So that's kind of my experience in a nutshell. We can dive into different aspects of different careers Ami and I have had, but also before we get there, Ami, I think you and I are gonna talk a little bit about some of the learnings along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And to Irena's point, this kind of agenda is what we thought would be most helpful, but we really want to hear from you. And it looks like the ages are around, 16 to 18, which is helpful. So I feel like, what is that, like sophomore, kind of sophomore later in high school. But we'll go through this, and then of course we want to hear more of your questions. So I think in terms of the first thing was around education, and just to kind of jump in here, Charlotte kind of, had asked us before, we've gone to some big name schools, and, the question was, what was our experience like? And how are things different? Because I'm sure, maybe you guys could just say yes, no, I'm sure college might be top of mind for some of you. So we can kind of speak to that briefly. Irena, do you want to go first in terms of your college experience and how things might be different, or how you've thought about education? I know you talked about your career journey, but things that might be relevant for them to think about.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the notes, Ami, but we have students from all around the world. So I think the college question becomes both, what is it like to think about college when you're a US citizen, maybe when you're outside of the US and maybe looking to apply here. We can address all these questions. We'll talk in generalities for now, but in Q&A, we can be more specific. I would say when Ami and I were applying to college and figuring out what to do, there's really just one path everybody went on. I think the times have changed quite a bit. Long gone are the days of 4 to 40. I don't know if guys know that expression, but 4 years to get a 40-year job. That doesn't exist anymore because jobs and skill sets are changing so swiftly. And you guys know, but college costs have increased significantly. Almost tenfold since we went to college. And so it becomes more important than ever to figure out, why am I going to college and what am I going to do after? It is still definitely a launch pad for better jobs, higher paid jobs, better career prospects. But times have changed so much that a general degree from a general university could become a burden just because of the cost, as well as maybe not being prepared for the job that that are out on the market when you graduate. And so thinking about your college should be around, what skill sets do I want to build, and what do I want to do with this degree? What is going to be my path afterwards? And you guys are in high school, but you have to start thinking now. It's long gone are the days where you could go to college and figure it out. It is so expensive and so competitive that really it's got to be, that kind of thinking has to start in high school, and you have to start asking yourself, what do I want to accomplish, and with this particular goal in mind, which university makes sense? And then doing the calculations, does this cost make sense? What are the salaries that are typical after I graduate? Does all of this make sense in the bigger scheme of things?
Yeah, and just to build on that, because I know it can seem overwhelming, at least if I was in your shoes, if someone, if I thought, man, I need to start thinking about what I want to do in the future now. And I think that can be overwhelming, but really what it comes down to, and this is a skill and a habit that I wish I would have picked up on when I was much younger. I think it's a skill and a habit of sitting down and reflecting, and really taking the time to understand what you like and what you don't like. Because you obviously, from kind of a high school perspective, right, you have to take all these classes, fine, but really looking at it as, what do I like? What don't I like? But beyond that, outside of your school and your day-to-day, what activities are you drawn towards? Are there certain organizations that speak to you, certain brands, certain influencers and creators, right? Like, if I were you, I would definitely try to take the time, if not, every day, just once a month, even once a quarter, to kind of sit down and say, what are things in the last, couple of months that I've really enjoyed doing? What are areas that interest me? I'm really interested in, I'm really interested in like makeup, or I'm really interested in health and wellness, or science, whatever it may be. And then start to understand that, like, so you can see patterns of, what am I interested in? And then you can start to go further in that, and you can start to explore different clubs, activities. I think the other thing Irena talked about, which is important in terms of, the jobs that are here today won't be there tomorrow, right? So we can't even begin to tell you what are the jobs that would exist when you graduate, or 10 years from now, because the world is moving so fast. But what you can do, and again, another thing that I wish I would have done more when I was in high school, was really talk to people, talk to parents, talk to grownups, talk to aunts, uncles, neighbors, whoever. Ask them, what is it that you do? Like, help me understand what it is you do. What does that industry look like? And just start to get kind of more exposure to what's out there. Because again, those jobs may not exist by the time you're ready to enter the workforce, but it's just helpful to get an understanding of the lay of the land. And people can then also tell you where they think their job or their industry is going. So I think it's really important, you kind of go inwards to understand what is it you like, and then you start to identify with people. And I'll tell you right now, everyone, if you can, try to get on LinkedIn, right? And if any high schooler were to reach out to me to say, hey, I'm interested to learn more about partnerships, would you talk to me for 15 minutes? I'd be more than happy to do that. So I think it's important to just try to learn, and whether it's through, reflection, but then activities and talking to people, just so you have a sense of what is it that I may want to do and what is it that I'm interested in.
If I can add just a quick point to that I think is just along the lines of, how do you learn what you like and how do you prepare yourself? One of the studies over and over show that one of the most important things in your career will be your first job. It's kind of a defining point in a lot of people's lives. It sets you on a certain trajectory, and getting to that first job, it's getting harder and harder because of these changing skill sets. And so one way to think about it is, yes, universities will help you get there because they'll open doors career-wise, et cetera. But oftentimes they might not prepare you for that job. So this is how crazy behind universities are. But for computer programming, is not even part of the core curriculum of top universities at all. So they're behind. Universities are behind sort of where technology and where job market is. Yes, they give you a really important general education, but you got to start thinking about, how do I have skill sets that will be useful in jobs? And for that, I would have to say internships are gold. And, either going to startups like mine, or bigger companies that are always looking for interns. It's such a great way to build a skill set and be ready for the job market, as well as see, do I like this? And maybe use it as a tool for, getting rid of careers you don't like ahead of time, and really being prepared for that first job. Not to put too much pressure on it, but it's certainly a marked difference in what that first job is and kind of what your trajectory is afterwards.
Why don't we kind of pause there? Any questions on education? I mean, we can switch to talking about our career paths in more detail, and just general business career paths, but any questions on education that are top of mind?
Yeah, there were a few questions. So this one is for Irena. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong.
Irena, yeah, that was pretty good.
So what did you enjoy studying your degree at the University of Berkeley?
Yes, so I started the program there thinking I wanted to get a practical degree and a stimulating, like an interesting, fun degree. and at Berkeley, you can get a double major, which was really fun. And I think most universities can. So I picked political science because it felt like a very interesting topic for me. I had come from a country that just went through a war, and I was moving to another country. Just felt like politics was such an important topic to understand the world that I was living in. And then my business degree, Berkeley has an undergrad business program, which is sort of a lighter version of their MBA program. And it's skill building. It's truly a more practical degree because it's skill building in all the areas required to prepare you for a business job after the university. But in general, Berkeley as an institution, it's a very it's a very big school, so there's a lot of options. And if you come in kind of searching, it might be a really difficult time. But if you come in and you have thoughts, I want to study this and this, I think it's a more enjoyable process. But both of those degrees I enjoyed very much. And I have to say they've been useful throughout my whole life, as well as fun to learn.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And then just moving on, what made you choose to study an MBA from the University of Michigan?
Go Blue. I think there's some Michigan people in the audience. It was really, so I really wanted to get from a point A to a point B. So after consulting, to get into the MBA, to get into the CPG brand management career, it was pretty much, AMI's kind of an exception, but majority of people have to get an MBA to get into the CPG brand management world, because you're essentially becoming a general manager. And so the training was necessary for that. And when I was applying at the time, it was really 2 or 3 schools that were known for CPG brand management. And it was Michigan, Kellogg, which is Northwestern, and Duke University. Those 3 were kind of the main ones. And so I applied to Northwestern and Michigan, and chose Michigan because it felt like a better cultural fit. At the time, MBAs made a lot of sense for 2 reasons. 1, your salary doubled the moment you finished the MBA. And 2, it unlocked some careers that were not accessible with just an undergraduate degree. And so it just made a lot of practical sense for me. I know nowadays MBAs are viewed a little bit differently, but either way, because it's such a big investment in time and money, even when you're applying to MBAs, they want you to have a really good sense what you're going to use the MBA for, and how that fits within the school's direction, and can they help you get to that point? Because MBAs are really focused on getting people good jobs after they graduate, because they're measured on those metrics.
And then just a couple of builds on that. I think one, from an undergrad, I know the question wasn't directed at me, but for me personally, when I got into Stanford, I was planning to major, just if it's helpful to anyone, I was planning to major in psychology because I thought psychology was just so interesting. And I started going down that path. And then unfortunately, my parents told me, no way, you're not going to go to this, we're not going to pay this much money for you to come out with a degree that we feel like isn't going to drive anything. So I think then I ended up pivoting and I majored in economics, which, was really for me difficult. And I was kind of interested, but not really. And I saw there was a question in the chat about the degree. How do you combine that with your passion? So just what I ended up doing is I ended up focusing, majoring in economics, but then I did find activities in college, like at Stanford. So I still was involved with the psych department. So I did a lot of cultural psychology research. I hung out with them all the time. I still took as many classes as I could. And so that was my way of trying to kind of tap into that while also majoring in something that was, quote, more practical. Honestly, if I could have done it all over again, I would have stuck with my passion, because I think a key thing is if you're passionate about something, you'll figure things out. But that was just kind of, something to keep in mind, that if you do decide to go to college and you're majoring in something, don't just, it's still smart to look at what are other activities or other avenues that you can still explore that might be very different than your major that you may be interested in. And then to answer, I think it was Shreya who asked the question in the chat. We have a slide and there are a couple slides where we'll talk about, depending on the major, and maybe we could just flip to right now. I think the question was, how do you combine your major with passions or interests? So if you go to this slide, yeah. So I think this is a good example, and Irena, feel free to jump in here, of if you were to go to school and you said, okay, I think marketing is interesting, right? Well, you could get a major in you could get a degree in marketing, but then there's so many different types of jobs that you could jump off from, right? And so depending on your passion, your area of interest, you can see here different examples. There's everything from, okay, marketing could mean something like, I'm really into social media. And so how do I become a social media marketer or an influencer? How do I learn more about that space? To advertising, right? You could actually work at what's called an agency where you're developing creative, or you could be more of like a media expert in terms of marketing. So what are different ways that you can reach consumer? Is it through mobile? How do you reach consumers online? even things like direct mail, which, probably seem foreign to you, or TV, right? YouTube, different types of video content. So the different types of things that you can do with a major. And so you get your major, and then you can think about what are areas that interest me, and then start to experiment. And again, I think this is where talking to people, to me, building relationships, as I look at my career, networking, I know it's called networking, but I think of it as build relationships, talk to people, learn about what they do, ask them, how can I help you? Because you never know in the future how, people, I think a big reason why people move around and try different things is because they have relationships, and someone is potentially there kind of saying, hey, why don't you come with me? So I think that's a really important piece of, you get the major, you can do different things depending on what you're excited about, as this slide shows, but then also really talking to people and keeping these relationships going, because that's how you're going to learn. Irena, is there anything else that you would want to add on kind of this slide as an example of a major and the different career paths?
I would just say if there's certain careers people want to talk about, then we can kind of build these maps for them or dive deeper into any particular areas they want to. But I think this is a good example. This is a great example of how just you think marketing, but there's like 500 jobs around marketing. And so keeping that in mind is really helpful, because then you don't write off a whole industry just because it sounds like it would be marketing means advertising. Well, it really doesn't. It could mean general management. And so this is such a good slide to just showcase diversity of jobs you can have within just one major.
We also had a question for Amy. So economics is such a broad subject. What study methods did you use as a test for the numeracy and the literacy side of things?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time? I heard such a broad major, and then what was the last part?
Yeah, so economics is such like a broad subject, and what study methods did you use as a test for the literacy side and the numeracy side of things?
Sorry, so was it about kind of the quantitative versus the qualitative?
Yeah.
Piece of it? Yeah, so for me personally, the quantitative side of economics, economics is so broad. And I think the way, and every university is different in terms of how they approach, their degrees and their majors. At Stanford, it's a liberal arts education. And the way they taught economics is they wanted you to have both kind of the quantitative, like stats, econometrics, classes like that. You had to take some of those. And then there were also some more that was like applied, like developmental economics, and things that gave you more models to think about how to approach different situations. And so for me personally, I did all the quantitative economics courses. Personally, didn't love them. Where my interest was definitely more in terms of the qualitative. So how do I apply economics to think about economies and how they develop? What could that look like? Or how do I take economics and think about, gosh, I'm trying to think about some of the courses I took that I really loved. Developmental economics was a big one. I took another one, which I thought was super fascinating around, this may sound really lame, but I thought it was fascinating, around Social Security. And so if you think about the Social Security from a government perspective, how does the government play a role in the economics and something like Social Security? And how do we think about that more from an economics lens? And how do we make this program work? And so things like that for me was, I personally resonated more towards those types of classes. And I think that's where, in terms of how I use economics now day to day, I would say I'm not using a ton of it now in my day to day, but it does help in terms of, macro. I think what's really important is trying to always think about the big picture of what's happening, not only from, my specific industry, which is technology, but also what's happening in automotives, what's happening in consumer goods, what's happening in the restaurant business. Because the more, I think the macroeconomics, that taught me, like, if you can understand what's happening at a higher level, then everything is, kind of interdependent. And so it gives me a better sense of that as I approach my job every day.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It's quite interesting because I currently study economics, and to hear those courses, what you've done at university, sounds really interesting.
Yeah. Are there any other questions that people have before we?
Yeah, we can leave that to the Q&A part. Yeah. That's fine.
Okay, perfect. So I think the next topic we thought we could talk about, Irena, do you feel like the career paths, we should go through that again, or should we talk more about career changes?
Let's talk about career changes, and maybe, Ami, can you take us through when you decided to switch to different jobs, and did you have to learn new skills when you did that?
Yeah, good question. So it's funny, Irena and I think we've, approached probably our career path in different ways. So Irena was very clear in terms of like, I want to run my own business. I want to have my own business, create my own business. And that was kind of her North Star. That has been her North Star in terms of how she's moved through her career. I think for me, the biggest North Star that I realize now is I'm always about trying to future-proof myself. And so I'm trying to think about what are the skills or the industry or kind of the next thing that's coming up. And my approach has always been, can I get in early in that so that I become kind of an expert early on? And that means you learn a whole bunch of skills. It's scary because nothing is really known, but then you can help define some of that and then teach others. And that's kind of been how I've approached my career. So as a couple of examples, when I was at Unilever, again, I was there for 12 years. First 4 years was in brand management, but then I wanted to learn like what else is out there and how do I kind of get closer to the retailer. So then I did shopper marketing. And then from there, as I talked about before, e-commerce was literally within Unilever at the time. There were 3 other people that were starting to think about e-commerce. And so I thought, well, why don't I get in early on this new space that's new and different? I know it's going to impact us in the future. And so I jumped into it, and it was scary. It was overwhelming. To your point, I mean, the new types of skills, I mean, I thought it was interesting, but it was also like, whoa, this is completely different. And so I did that. And then part of it coming to Google was, okay, I've kind of felt like I've learned everything I could within consumer goods. Now I want to challenge myself and go into a tech company. And so I've done that. And as I think about what's next, kind of for me, I'm thinking about, well, I want to learn about cloud now because cloud is kind of the next thing. And so along that way, I think that's kind of how I've approached things. Some people, start in a specific role and then they work their way up, right? They might start as a marketing manager and they have a goal that I want to be chief marketing officer in the future. That's great. I think my approach has more been kind of this like weaving like up and down of what's kind of the next area, what's the next space, how do I get in early, learn, and then kind of jump to the next thing. And so that's kind of been the North Star that I've used as I've thought about different career roles. Irena, I think for you, what I find interesting is even though I know you had the North Star of I want to start my own company, I'm curious for you, like as you look back, are there roles that really, because I think one thing that's helpful is there are roles you take that you're like, wow, I do not like this, or this does not fit me. But there's still a benefit. As you look back in your career, what were those times where, or how did you approach those roles? Because you've taken on a lot of different types of roles. And how did you approach it when you were like, I really don't like this? And kind of how did you navigate that situation?
That's a good question, Ami. I don't know that I've ever thought of it this way. But I have to say the through line through different roles that I've had in different jobs has the learning stopped? And when the learning stops, I move on. It's really been like that. And so from a standpoint of I wanted to go, from getting my degree and be running my own business, my approach was start sort of at a big company level, learn as much as possible and kind of get down to running my own company. And so it felt like that. I started with consulting with all these really big companies like Nokia and HP and Gap, and learning how, what makes them grow. And then within 3 years, I felt like, okay, I've kind of learned what there is to learn at this very high level, advisory level. And then brand management, sort of the next sort of, I would say, a little bit more hands-on running a company, where you have these different brands and each brand comes with its challenges. And after I've done 4 different brands in 4 different categories, I felt like I got this too. I'm like, it's a little bit of a Ferris wheel. I've done the ride 4 times. I'm ready for the next. And then starting my own company, I feel like I may have come to the point where the learning never stops. So this one might just be it for a while, at the very least, because it touches so many different elements from, how do you create something from nothing? Then how do you let people know you exist? How do you run a company? How do you build a team? And really now I'm getting to the point, how do I mentor other companies, in particular with female leadership? That's very rare in the startup world. So I'd have to say it's always been, when I get to the point, okay, I've learned everything there is to learn here. It's time to move. I just know it's time to move. And so we'll see. I've been doing startup for 7 years. It's the longest job I've ever had. So we'll see what the next thing is going to be. But that's how I would say is the time felt right when the learning stopped.
Yeah. Yeah, +1 to that.
Oh, look at this question. I mean, this is exactly what we're, I think, going to talk about next. What are the different departments within a business?
Yeah, great question. If you actually go up to one slide. Yeah, it's really small, because sorry, I'm on my phone, but that's a great question. There are so many different roles. And so what Irene and I did here is we just took a snapshot of, Facebook's organizational structure. It's pretty similar at most organizations in terms of all the different roles. And I think the question was, how did we decide how we wanted to approach these roles? Was that the question? Sorry. I think it was something like that. I think for me personally, and I'll let Irena answer for herself as well. For me, I kind of came in on more of this marketing track, right? And so I came in, it's not here like brand management, but I came in thinking I want to be a marketer. And once I got into that role, I think this is what's really important, is how do you, even when you're in your function, try to kind of learn about the other roles within the organization. And so I, tried my best to do that at Unilever. I tried to understand what are the different types of teams and functions and roles within Unilever. And then for me, I learned about this idea of shopper marketing, which is marketing with retail partners. And so I kind of moved over there. And then within, from there, I moved into e-commerce, which was e-commerce ran the gamut of this. It was everything from sales to marketing to, I did some
data analytics, right?
Data analytics. Yes. A lot of consumer analysis, like trying to get consumer insights. And so did a whole host of things, and then eventually decided to go into business development. But I think one thing is, once you get into a company, and again, ideally, what you want to focus on, but don't feel like you can't jump around, right? And I think that's an important thing as you join companies. I'm going to go back to build relationships, build as many relationships as you can, talk to people. Older people love talking about themselves and their role and what they've done, right? Irene and I are 2 examples of that. Happy to share any knowledge and information we can. So I would start talking to people, build relationships in different departments and learn about their roles. And then even you could shadow them and then start to kind of figure out if you can do try out those roles. And I think the beauty of a big company is that a lot of times you can try out, if you go into Unilever or Google or Facebook, you can try different types of roles, right? They give you those opportunities, but you're still within the same company. So then you kind of figure out what it is you want to do. And then you can go to another company and kind of double down and start to build a focus on that area. But that's kind of how I approached it and how I would advise others to approach it.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I started with consulting too, is because it gave me a breadth of information on how different companies structure their businesses. And within each company, I was changing companies every 3 months. So I got a really good view into, all right, a tech company, this is what it's all about. They are ran by product developers and by coders, and versus a consumer product goods company like Gap, they're run by designers and marketers. So, different company will have different centers of importance and growth. And so it's, there's high level understanding of business, but truly differs by company and by industry, which is why, to go back to our original point, and it's because we can't stress it enough, tinker with it now, ask questions now, so you can kind of start getting a sense of, all right, if I really want to do product development, then I need to be in this kind of company. And these are the kinds of products that would make sense for me to study at school.
And I would also say, I know we didn't talk about this at first, but one other notion is, think about, like, this is your life and there really is no set path. So if you feel like, I don't know what it is I want to do, this might sound crazy, but take time off, take a year up, take a gap year, right? Like, figure it out and, do volunteer your time, or, do an externship, like, take the time to figure that out, and don't feel like you have to just go to college or do this because everyone else is. And I know so many people now, including my brother, one person, he took a year off, like he went to school for a year and he was like, this is really intense. He went to university. He's like, this is too intense. He stopped. He volunteered at a nonprofit for a full year, and then he went back to school. And then even after that, went into investment banking. And after 4 years, he's like, this is intense. He did nonprofit again for a year. And now he's like, president of a hedge fund, and he like loves his job. But when I talked to him recently, he was like, you know what, honestly, it was only when I kept taking years off. Like, he literally a couple times in his career took a year off, completely stepped back, did something very, Indian. My parents were like, what is going on? So I think it's important to like do what you think is right for you and take the time to invest now and like figuring that out. And don't feel compelled to go to college and do what everyone else is doing. I think there was a question that came up. Can we work in multiple departments in a business? So that's a good question. I would say it depends. I mean, I think based on if you want to do something that's more like engineering, right? So if we stick to this example of Facebook and the organizational structure, I think there's probably maybe a couple of boxes like software development, infrastructure engineering, where you probably need a more specialized degree. But honestly, I think everything else, and I'm just looking really quickly, I think all of these other roles, a lot of them, you can kind of, if you get into a company, what I've seen, you are able to kind of move around. Now, it's not as easy as 1 year you do something within finance, another year marketing, business development, et cetera. But I do think this is where some companies do have these rotational programs. And so like, that's what I did when I graduated. I joined AT&T. They had a rotational program. I know Unilever has something called the Future Leaders Program, where like a year at a time, they kind of move you around in different parts of an organization. If you don't know what you want to do, I would say go to school, major. This is where Irene and I may differ, but I also am not as close to what's going on today. But I would say major in something you're interested in, right? And then try to join a company. Like, I would do research on what are companies that have rotational programs, because a lot of them have, like, a lot of these big companies have a rotational program, because it's not necessarily the expectation that everyone coming out, unless you're like an engineer or like something very specialized. If it's more that you're interested in business, there are companies that will give you a chance to like move around so that you can get exposure and see what you may like and not like. And in that case, you don't necessarily need different majors. It's just a matter of understanding now which are the companies that offer these rotational programs. Any other questions just on kind of this organizational setup? Hopefully this is helpful to give you a sense of the different, again, types of roles in a company. Okay. If not, I know there were questions about, Irena has had a pretty interesting startup life experience. And so I thought maybe we could spend 5 minutes quickly, if it's, just probing on that a bit, Irena, like your experience with Fresh Monster. I'm curious to understand, how long did it take for you, or if you can talk a little bit about your journey with like the accelerator program, and how long it took for you from when you thought, oh, I think I have an idea, to actually getting the business off the ground and from when you could actually scale, right? You were like producing things, and what was that process like?
It's a really good question, Nami. It's one I actually think about a lot because I get to talk to a lot of people who have ideas and they're like, how do I become an entrepreneur? Or what do I do when I have an idea? And I have to say, having some work experience and having an understanding of how to run a business is really helpful and shortens the timeline. That's kind of the biggest difference between you having an idea and saying, how do I launch this idea? And somebody who actually understands what it takes to develop, produce, distribute a product. Did we have a question? Nope, just some background noise. So for me, it took about a year from the concept of the idea to the actual production of the products. And I would say that's incredibly fast just because my co-founder and I had the knowledge of the industry, what it took to produce. Also, we fundraised that first year and people were more inclined to give us an investment because of our backgrounds. They had confidence that we understood what it took to run a company. So I would say in general, though, it's a much, much slower journey. So I mentor 5 female-owned or female-run companies, and they're all in their 3rd, 4th year, and only now getting to the point where they're producing larger production runs. It just takes a long time. 2 main reasons are you need money. It's really hard to produce big things right out of the gate. And 2, it's really risky because your idea in your head, A, is never going to come out the way you think about it, and B, you really don't know if people are going to respond to it the way you hope they will. And so it takes quite a bit of time to get what the jargon in the industry is product market fit, which means just that is are people going to buy your product or service? So anyhow, it's a long journey. For me, we went to an accelerator that was helpful. That certainly shortened the timeline on the fundraise in particular, because fundraising can sometimes take up to 2 years. For us, it was 5 months. And then from there, it really kind of depends what happens in the marketplace. And are you able to make money right out of the gate, or you have to keep fundraising? And so different paths for different industries too, but this is particular to producing something, making something out of nothing.
That makes sense. Charlotte, yeah, I think you're right. I know we've only got 15 minutes, so why don't we open it up? If people can unmute themselves, that would be awesome, just so that we can hear questions that you have, or feel free to put it in the chat as well. But we really want to hear from you and understand how we can be helpful.
Yeah, I think we'll let the audience just think of some questions, but we do have some pre-written questions that the audience had put in the registration form, so we can go through that. So how have you both networked with professionals who are senior to you during your work time?
Yeah, have we? So I think the biggest thing is I've gotten better at this. It's just setting up time with people. So reaching out to them saying, hey, I would love to just learn more about what you do and get your thoughts on how I should approach things. I think you will find that people are very open to talking. And the other thing I would say is, one thing I've learned is what's just as important as networking up is actually networking across and talking to your peers. Because as you move up in companies, like Irena is a great example. She's actually one of my closest friends, very sharp woman. There's 4 or 5 of us that we worked together at Unilever, and we still now keep in touch. And we kind of talk about ideas and what should we do from a career perspective. And so I would say just investing in those relationships and reaching out saying, can I grab 15 minutes of your time? It's as simple as that. And then making sure, though, that you do come prepared with questions. I think that's really important. Always come prepared when you are talking to someone and requesting their time.
And maybe I'll address this last question. What are the 3 main points, in addition to meeting new people, of advice you would give to high school, early college students? For me, I would say number 1 would be internships or clubs. Figuring out, you have an idea what you would like to do, go test it out and see, do you really like it or not? Because now is such a great time to get rid of ideas and, figure out, kind of troubleshoot your way to, all right, I'm really enjoying this, or I'm not enjoying this. So there's internships and clubs. I did all of those throughout college and high school too, just to kind of figure out, all right, I mean, I'm doing well in this area, I'm not really liking this one. The other one is, and this one is so important to you guys, more important than it was for us, but that's this building of skill sets. Like I said, some of the colleges won't even provide you with those. So thinking about, if I want to work at a tech company, if I want to work at a business company, like what sort of skill sets do I need? And each industry is going to have their own specific kind of baseline floor expectations. And in business, for example, even right now, I can't hire anybody unless they have really strong Excel skill sets. They can't do anything in our company. Two, they need to understand how cloud works and how all of our systems talk to each other. So there's sort of basic assumptions that when you're hiring, that you're looking for people to do. And then, the third one is, think about your college goal. And I know this is not as sexy as, exploring yourself and having fun. Of course, that's really important. And that's why we all went to college. But try to think about, why is this particular college going to be useful to me? And I keep stressing this, maybe more than me, just because, I'm thinking about how the financials have changed so much. Like I said, college costs 10x. You really don't want to be in debt for 20 years. And so thinking about, how is this college going to help me where I need to go? And then, is it culturally a good fit? Because for sure, you want to be in a place where you feel like you're thriving and you're meeting people that are going to be around you for the rest of your life. But those would be my 3 advice.
That's great. I think there's some other questions that came in. I'm actually a first-year undergrad student pursuing my bachelor's in commerce. The August limits, but I haven't figured out if anything is, what should I do? Yeah. So I would say I don't know. Sorry. And who was the person that asked the question? I think the biggest thing is trying different things to see what excites you. So I don't know, kind of, if you have been trying different things or talking to people, or even thinking about, again, trying to stop and reflect, like on a daily basis, what are the articles, like even when you go on your phone, what are articles that you tend to gravitate towards, or who are influencers? Like understanding what it is that you naturally are interested in, and then trying different things, because college is, to Anna's point, such a great time. Like if you think you might be interested in, I don't know, like conservation, like joining that club and seeing, and if that doesn't work, trying something else. But I think that's really where you kind of have to go inwards and then start experimenting and look at it as like, this is just an experiment, a 3-month experiment, and just keep doing that. And I think over time, as you continue to do that and reflect, you will hopefully be able to get a sense of what excites you. And by the way, it'll change, right? What excites you now will probably change as you continue down your career. But I think it's just trying to expose yourself to as much as you can. Irina, anything to add to that in terms of trying to figure out what excites?
It's just trial and error. It's just doesn't come to, I don't think I've ever met anybody who's just woken up and said, I am going to be, okay, maybe there's some people who woke up and said, I'm going to be an architect. It's very hard to find people like that. In general, most people just tinker and figure their way into not only what they're interested in, but also what are they good at. Because when you find those two, then that's when you're going to thrive. And talk to your teachers. I bet you a lot of your teachers know exactly what you're good at, and maybe you're not even thinking about it, but they'll identify and say, you're really good at this. Have you considered looking into careers in this particular area? I'm already seeing that I have a 10-year-old that his teachers will tell me, did you notice he's really good at this particular area? And then, they know you the best. And then your parents do. They probably have lots of ideas.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would definitely recommend, if you feel a little stuck at any point, reach out. I would literally ask teachers, friends, parents, people close to you, like, what are 3 things that I'm really good at? Right? Because other people, they see you on a daily basis, and they may be able to kind of spark something for you. Okay, let's go. I think there are other questions.
What will the business landscape be like in the coming 5 to 10 years? That's a different question, right? We haven't answered that one. Yeah.
Yeah, for that one.
I think it's going to look very different. I think everything we told you today, take it with a grain of salt, even particular around MBAs. 10 years ago, if you didn't have an MBA, it was hard to imagine you would be kind of at the top level of any company. That has changed quite a bit because, again, the marketplace is changing into skills, more into skills versus into degrees. So that's something to keep in mind, kind of how the industries are going to look different. And, kind of when you think about top companies right now versus 10 years ago, they're all tech companies. And so the landscape is changing in the sense that business, right now is probably going to be closer and closer to tech. And so in that space, you're going to have to build some skill sets. Maybe you don't have to be a coder, but you'll probably have to understand how to code. And, I think about your generation coming, you're kind of in between sort of, I would say, you guys are Gen Z. So sort of the next generation after you, everybody's going to code. You guys are kind of right in between of maybe I should code because it's going to be helpful. But I would say technology is here and it's going to stay. And then, kind of as you go through college, you're going to see what industries are popping up and you kind of have to stay agile. This is what I was saying, the 4-year degree to get a 40-year job, it doesn't exist anymore. And so being flexible and having your mindset that you're probably going to change jobs a lot is one that I would keep in mind. You look at Ami and now, we've changed a lot of jobs, but I think about people that I've hired and they've changed jobs twice as much. So sort of the frequency of job changing is going to be in your future for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. We did have a couple of more questions, if that's all right.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Okay. So this applies for Ami. What does a typical day look like for you during a working day?
Oh gosh, what is a typical day? That's a good question.
That's a really good question. This is exactly the kind of question we hope you guys will be asking.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, they're great. Obviously there's no typical day, but I would say in an ideal, in general, I really try to start the day with just understanding like at a macro level, like what's going on in the world, right? And sometimes I do that better than others, but spend some time reading up on the news, what's happening. And then kind of the next part of my day is usually trying to prepare for meetings with like a client, with an external client. And so that's anything from working with my product management team, my engineering team, because a lot of times we're developing new features for these clients, like in this case, Sephora. So I'll be working with my internal team saying, okay, this is what we said we would deliver. Where are we at in terms of developing this product? And so working with them to understand that, preparing, maybe even working with legal because I'm, working through like contracts and negotiations. And then going back to the client and having meetings with them to say, okay, this is where we're at, understanding what are their challenges, what do they need, are we meeting them? And then really just, it's kind of a lot of internal meetings to get all these answers and really move things forward. And then working with the client and bringing it to them and saying, here's where we're at and kind of helping them move forward. So that's really a typical day. But I think the one thing that I'm really trying hard to work on is sticking with the macro, starting off with understanding what's going on in the world, because that really helps me keep the big picture in mind. Otherwise, you can easily get into the details. And so I'm trying to do more of that. And then of course you sprinkle an email, which I have to send. I'm a big proponent of just try to block out time to check your email because it just allows you to focus much better. And then last thing I would say is eat your vegetables first is a phrase, which means when you have your things to do the hard things first in the morning. So I really try to do the hard, more deep think work in the morning, and then in the afternoon, kind of do the easy stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So this question is for Irene. What challenges did you face in your career journey because you started up with your own business?
Challenges facing starting a business. Different challenge every single day, doesn't stop. It's the most challenging thing to do ever. But big challenges in any startup are number one, fundraising. and having funds to launch your own company, because not only do you need the money to create things and market them and deliver them, but also you need to think about your own salary and your team's salary. So fundraising is number one. I'd say number two is quickly figuring out problems. And so you just have to have this mindset of it's a problem solving type of job. And so you have to have this mindset of no matter what it is, I'm going to solve it. So that's kind of a big one. I'd say third one is being a female in the startup community is really hard too. In general, you're seen as a second-class citizen for sure. So that's a really big challenge. And how do you overcome it? And how do you have conversations with investors so you can convince them that your valuation should be the same as the guy's company? And, getting a lot of guys' opinions on potentially some female topics, that's really hard too. So I'd say that's a big challenge. And then I finally have to say, when you are your own boss and you don't have a boss, the big thing is just managing your time well, because running your own company can eat you alive and take over your life. And you don't want that. You want to have balance. And I think your generation is pretty good about this. I think Ami and I grew up in a generation where you work until you drop dead. I think that's changed quite a bit. And, I have to say a happier, healthier life is one where there's a work-life balance. And so creating those boundaries is really challenging when you're your own boss. And so that's a big challenge, but one that can be solved as long as you're mindful about it and purposely trying to create that kind of division between work and private life.
Yeah, I think definitely time management it should be a priority, especially when maintaining that balance. And then we can wrap up with a final question for Ami. What is one of the projects that you enjoyed working at Google?
One of the projects I enjoyed working on at Google. I think one project I worked on, which was really cool, was it was a project where I worked to evaluate basically startups. We were looking into kind of to launch a different feature, and we tried to figure out, do we build it ourselves? Do we look externally and partner with a startup that's already doing it, or would we acquire? And so it was something I worked on with the M&A team. And so I got a chance to work with all these external partners, all these startups, to understand what it is that they did, and then worked with them and then figured out internally, what are we doing? And then kind of did the evaluation to see, should we acquire them? Should we partner with them, or should we try to build it ourselves? And so that was a really cool project, because I felt like I actually made an impact to a company as big as Google. Like, I actually made an impact to say, no, let's build it. And then we prioritized and got the resources to do that.
That sounds like fun, Ami.
Yeah, that was a fun project.
Much for that. And thank you for coming today.
Good luck to you guys. And like Ami said, feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time today to talk with us. I think we might have lost a few attendees to lunch, but I just wanted to say that thank you for taking time away from your families, I guess, on a Saturday to talk with us. And I also just wanted to point out and shout out Miss Raman, who is actually one of our board of directors and has helped with giving us advice and helping us as an organization. So I think I'd probably second that. I think reaching out to people and trying to connect and just learn from others is a very big, I guess, piece of advice that we should all take. But overall, thank you so much, I guess, Miss Todd and Miss Raman, and also Charlotte, for helping coordinate this event and make it successful. I think also, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say thank you guys. And no matter what, just know that, like, just the fact that you're even attending this shows that you're motivated. And at the end of the day, just if you're motivated to solve problems, to Irina's point, like, you'll be fine. And don't, make sure you're having fun too, because life is short.
Yeah. I think also, if Charlotte, if you want to like also take a picture really quick, if we could get a picture with all the attendees, if you guys would want to turn your cameras on just so we can see everyone. And also Miss Todd and Miss Raman can also see some of the speakers, or some of the attendees.
Yeah, I can do that. However, I can't see like the rest of the attendees.
Okay, how about we give it, I guess, like 10 more seconds for anyone to turn their camera on, and then if not, we can just take the picture then.
Okay, yeah. I'll do it for the first slide and then I'll turn. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that should be it. Thank
Okay,
you.
sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for again attending. And if you ever want to reach out to, I think Miss Todd or Miss Rahman, I think you can, I guess, reach out to us, or if they want to share their emails as well, that or like LinkedIn or something that you guys can connect with them on, that would be great. I think we'll also be sharing the recording of this event and also having a blog post about it, so we can you guys can like get a gist and like a summary of this event just as needed. Yeah, I think that should be it. And thank you so much again, Miss Todd and Miss Rahman, for talking.
Meet you guys. Good luck.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Yeah, so I think really quickly for the attendees, we wanted to share just a little bit about our sponsors, our event sponsors. So if Evelyn, if you would like to share those slides.
Sure. Hey, everybody, I'm Evelyn. I'm part of the finance committee at SparkED. Let me share my screen and I can talk about the sponsors a little bit. Can you see the slides right now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.